dokie. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. So you're my family now. So welcome back, and your commitment and tenacity to be involved in this long process is going to pay off. We have tonight and possibly 2 more sessions to complete our entire curriculum, and we're looking forward to it. And this is the 12th installment of the Recovery Boot Camp and Schnellenberger Family Foundation presentation of Basic Training Family Edition. And as always, thank you for your commitment. Thank you for your tenacity, your desire to be educated and be here, to be engaged in your own recovery, as well as we have to give a shout out to the coach. Thank you, Coach. Thank you, Beverly and the Schnellenberger Family Foundation for their generosity and their love, which allows us to bring you this so you in turn can love in a way that is not harmful to your family. Tonight, our beloved executive producer and CEO, Dave, is preparing for his wedding this weekend, and it is my honor and blessing to be able to conduct that wedding. And it's interesting that it should happen tomorrow. I have the rehearsal for Dave's wedding. But before that, and it's just an example of this disease and its tragedy and how much I really hate it. At 11 in the morning, I have a funeral for a guy that I used to sponsor who was in his 60s, who I haven't worked with in a while. He stopped calling me. When he did, he would lie because he's been using for a while. And he passed away over the weekend. And his 80-something-year-old father, his only family left, found him dead in his father's condo in the morning. And this is a man that has no wife left, and he did not have the chance to learn about this disease. And when he spoke to me, he said, you know, I had a little aneurysm 2 weeks back, and I thought that maybe that was the thing that triggered the son to relapse. And he was unaware. He wasn't able to see the signs. He didn't understand the concept of boundaries. And in fact, the son had been using for probably 2 or 3 months. And this was a man in his 60s who just could not be honest and could not or would not have the capacity to lose the desire for his image to be more than in his essence. And that's what we try to instill here at our RBC, Recovery Boot Camp. You know, we got young guys. They want to look a certain way. They want to work out, and that's great. But what we try to hammer home, we inculcate them with, is that the image is the byproduct of a solid essence, of the ability to like yourself and love yourself, both strengths and weaknesses. And in doing so, you become a man of dignity and integrity. And in that reality, then the byproduct is that the outside things fall into place. So Dave's not here to give our technical support, so I will try to make his announcement. Tonight, our producer and CEO, Tim Schnellenberger, is manning the computer, so he will be answering all of your technical questions as always. Also, remember to send your questions in for the Q&A period at the end, as well as answer the polls as rapidly as you can. That way we can move along more quickly. Also, Tim will be posting Nick Johnson's contact information. If you want to reach out to him, or you have somebody that may be in need of talking to someone to help with placement in a program, here, in fact, if not, please give Nick a call, as well as remember to download both the study guide and the assessment questions, which are in the section that's marked handout on the website. So, you know, I'm going to just reiterate what our main goal is. And our goal is to educate you in the same way that we educate our clients here at Recovery Boot Camp, with love and information and constructive realities, and at time critique, you know, and at time we have to be edgy with them. And we do this because the truth and the right thing is seldom the easy thing. And we want you to be armed so that you too can fight the battle and come out in the place where you are healthy. And that's our goal, to prepare you to almost become a lay treatment professional so that you can engage with your identified patient, you can engage with your family member in a way that's effective for both you and them. Remember, we talked earlier that as you increase your own mental health and your own personal recovery, you exponentially increase the possibility of your family member attaining long-term recovery, because addiction is a systemic disease and it's horrible. So today we're going to start on slide 125, and you see it up on the board. It's the phases of care for the family. And I figure we'll start with a poll question right off the bat. So why don't we do that? And let me ask this simple question. Is there a somewhat standardized path for a family's recovery? We need a button with the Jeopardy music. Totally. Every time a poll comes up, I just want to play that thing. So I mentioned that we're looking for about today and probably 2 more. Tonight, I hope we're going to actually move into the next section of enabling and boundaries. So we're going to try and get through this information in the phases of care, and we'll move in. But we have a lot of poll questions because now we're getting into that place where it's really personal. So we're looking to get you stimulated into seeing where you understand where we're going to start from.
Okay, good. We're ready to go.
Good. You got the answers?
There you go.
71% of you are yes, and 29% of you are no. Excellent, excellent answers. And what we know is that, yes, there is in fact a somewhat standardized approach to recovery, even for the families. Much in the same way that the last week we were involved, or 2 weeks ago, in the phases of care of the client, we also have to be in the same way in the phases of care of the family. Phase 1, what exactly is that? Well, it's a simple question. What is happening to my loved one in the moment? And then what is happening to myself in relation to that person? And understand what I am working on as a family member of that person in treatment. Phase 2, what's happening to my family? While my loved one is in the process of working on himself, what am I doing to heal the rift that occurred because of this disease? And am I asking for help and taking direction from professionals, or am I still stuck in a mindset of either guilt or shame or animosity about the disease? And sometimes our anger towards the disease itself can prevent us from actually taking the steps. And then finally, the phase 3 of the family healing is applying that knowledge, applying the newfound knowledge. And we do this in a specific way. So let's get into the phases one by one. Let's look at phase 1. So we asked the question, what's happening to my loved one? I have to understand what you're working on as a family member and what are they working on. And oddly enough, they mirror. So what is the very first thing that we look for when we're in this phase? We look for understanding the disease model. You may ask why we spent so much time on the front end of this process to educate you about the specifics of the disease model, the neurology, the diagnostic criteria, all of these things, because when this, in essence, is us giving you the phase 1 of your own personal recovery. We understand the disease model, and we have to learn about it in depth. We have to remember, we discussed the medical model and how that was an appropriate diagnostic tool, but failed as a recovery technique. We talked about the community model, which came out of the model of the CDC with the 3 vectors. And finally, we brought in depth the recovery model on all levels, including the body, mind, and spirit. So we move on, and we've, in essence, if you've been participating since the beginning, you have almost gone through this phase yourself. Then what we talk about is we look at the benefits gained and the price paid for this entire process. So let's actually ask another question. And that is simply, I got a poll question, and it's simple. Is getting high a spiritual solution for the addict? We're testing your memory about the recovery model. Is getting high a spiritual solution?
Pretty close.
Is it close?
All right, not the answers.
Oh.
That's the clip.
Oh, request to close. All right, we're getting ready to close the polls.
Ready to close the polls.
Click, 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 click.
1, 2,
And it's closed.
okay.
And we have yes or YRS because I can't spell even monosyllabic words. So 39% say yes and 61 say no. Well, if you remember, the answer is absolutely yes. Because when we understand the spiritual malady, which we talked at length about in the modeling of these disease, we understand that the existential pain that the person feels is in fact their spiritual malady. Their discomfort with reality is their spiritual malady. And spirituality is loosely defined as having to do with reality. My perception of me in my own reality and my comfort there, which means that if I get high because I don't like reality, that means that I have a spiritual problem, and absolutely getting high is the spiritual solution. And it's effective, but remember, it's not good because I'm addressing a spiritual problem that exists in my brain, and I'm using an actual corporeal or physical result, which is an overcompensation. And so getting high is in fact the spiritual solution, but it's counterfeit because it doesn't actually work. And then we move on to this idea. We got to understand how this heals the brain. We spend a lot of time talking about, in an overview, the physical allergy, the mental obsession, the spiritual malady. But then we tend up, and we do this here in Recovery Boot Camp at length, is bringing to the forefront of the studies the idea of the spiritual and paradigm shift, the psychic shift, because this is at the core. Remember that the physical and mental symptoms of this disease go into immediate remission. If I have an allergy and I don't eat peanuts, I don't go into anaphylactic shock. And if I don't surround myself with scratch and sniff peanut butter or those car things that smell like peanut butter, I don't desire to ingest it. And over that time, it completely goes into remission. But the spiritual malady stays in full effect. And the reason is, if you remember, is that the physical allergy and the mental obsession are results of consuming the drugs and alcohol. But the spiritual malady is the reason I did in the first place. So if I remove the agent of harm, what I'm left with is the reasons I got high in the first place. So when we talk about recovery, and we stress this here at RBC, that we have to focus on understanding and developing coping skills that address the problems we had long before we picked up, right? And we also have to understand that this is an impossibility to access if we're still getting high. There is no solution present vis-a-vis getting high, not in the long run. For what reason? Well, in the book Alcoholics Anonymous, they use this term all the time: conscious contact with the higher power, conscious contact with God. Seek God, may you find him now, have a conscious contact. And we have to remember, what is the primary requirement for a conscious contact with anything? You can't be unconscious. It's the number one requirement. So once you learn this in your own life, that you can't, and understand that you may not be using, but you may be holding the anger. You may be holding the, resentments towards the patient. You may be holding resentments to the family that is separated from you because they blame you for exacerbating the disease of alcoholism, and it's not your fault. But those things, you can feed on them. We get juice from anger as family members. It makes us feel sanctimonious, above it, holier than thou, and we ride on that place to our own detriment. And that becomes our little addiction. We become addicted to be engaged in fixing the disease, right? And so what we have to do is understand that that is our spiritual malady. Because once the disease is put into remission and our identified patient is in a safe place, we're left with that angst. And we can't allow that to continue to be our personal addiction. And we have to recognize that we need a spiritual experience as well. And in doing so, address this. So let's move on to phase 2. What's happening to my family? Asking for help, taking direction from professionals. This is hugely, hugely important, right? Because in order for me to address my own spiritual conundrums that come from being exposed to the disease, I need to reach out to professionals as well. I need to reach out to peers. I need to reach out to my own support group, right? Because what has to happen? Remember that when we were looking at the addict, that the addict being the central focal point of the universe of the family sucks everything in around him like a black hole and controls the entire dynamic of the family. After we remove that, we have to step aside and start to look at what happened and make adjustments again to reintegrate and reorganize the family dynamic. We have to also understand that we need to have full acceptance that this is a disease. We have to accept unequivocally that this is a brain disease that our loved one suffers from. We also have to fully embrace the idea of the 3 C's of Al-Anon. I don't know if you guys remember him, Odd Al-Anon. Again, typing error, because it's the 3 C's of Odd Al-Anon. So what are the 3 C's? The first one is, I did not cause it. The second one is, I cannot control it. And the third one is, I definitely can't cure it. And if I remember those as my own personal boundary as a family member, I can start to formulate a plan of action for myself and by extension reflect that on the identified patient. And I also have to accept that I and the family have in fact become ill solely by proximity to this disease, solely by association. So this is what happens in the second stage. While my loved one is starting to work on their own, I start to bring these ideas and concepts into our family, into my recovery, into my Al-Anon meeting. Next one, what are we talking about? We're still in phase 2. So what are one of the problems that occur in this phase? Oddly enough, we tend to protect the addiction, right? We get into this weird kind of thing. We're either shy, maybe there's some shame behind it, right? And we have to reassign those roles that have been convoluted by the act of addiction, right? So we have to step away from that denial. We have to fix those roles, and they need to be reshuffled again. We have to recognize the patterns of truth that the family has settled into, right? And when I say truth, it's not a truth that's a veritas. It's a truth that's become accepted, that things are always going to be this way, that this is just the cards we've been dealt, that we have huge responsibility for this. These are the things that we have slowly absorbed over time of exposure to the disease, and they have caused us to settle into this sort of comfortable uncomfortability. In other words, we've accepted without even thinking about it the status quo, which is maladaptive. It's odd because the human brain generally does not analyze things that are commonly accepted. And in a maladaptive environment, we start to accept negative paradigms and to the point where we don't even think about them, right? So let's look at the very next question. We got another poll question, I believe. No, not yet. Next one. It's on the next slide. So let's talk a little bit about codependency, which is the next stage. Owning your stuff and owning their stuff. Do I own their stuff? Do I expect them there to own mine? Well, basically codependency, most people think it's doing everything for everybody in the chance that you will get an accolade or a validation that your love is strong. But it actually manifests in 2 different ways. And one of the ways that it manifests is in the of codependency, where I do for them what they can't do for themselves, when I smother them, when I try to control all of their circumstances, when I own everything in the entire family and put it on my shoulders because I'm the only one who can fix this. However, the other side of that coin is the counter version of codependency or counterdependency, where I have become so frustrated that the minute that they go off to treatment or the minute they leave, or even if they're using and I set my boundaries up and I do not engage with them in active addiction, The relief happens that I now swing to the other end of the pendulum. And you know what? It's their bed. They made it. Let them lay in it. Let them fix it. It's all on them. I have nothing to do with it. It's their problem. They need to handle it. Right? What we know, there's this amazing expression from Coda, and it's actually in their book. And let me close this slide with it. How empty of me to be so full of you. It's almost as though you replace my identity with yours, and I'm willing to throw mine out, empty my cup, and fill it with your nonsense and your disease. And that's what we really have to do in phase 2 as families, is really start to look at our own dynamics, how they've been hurt, how we can heal them, take advice, seek professional help. And then finally, in phase 3, what we talk about is the family healing, right? Applying this newfound knowledge. So let's put a poll question in here. So here's the question. Have you, as family members, surrendered to this disease?
Great topics.
It's a good one, right?
Yeah, these are great.
Yeah. Because it's an interesting question.
I've heard that. Almost there.
Almost there. This one, everybody should be feverishly clicking that button, because I'm sure there's interesting answers.
Sorry, more seconds.
Count them down. 4, 3, 2, 1. Polls are closing. And the answers are up. 76% of you say that you have, in fact, surrendered to this disease, and 24% of you say no. And I would imagine, I'm not trying to read your mind, but the 24 that say no stand in direct, how do I say this? Stand in like this kind of direct anger about like, no, I'll never surrender to the disease of alcohol. And, so let's talk about surrender, because that's important. So now that we have that answer, let's ask another poll question. Very simply, is surrender in fact a losing proposition? I'm going to say that this is specifically geared towards the 25% of you that said you haven't surrendered.
Why don't you tell them what happened with the dermatologist?
Oh, it's next Friday. They postponed it. Oh yeah. So Tim told me to tell you guys what happened with the dermatologist. Absolutely nothing, because I thought it was tomorrow, but it's actually next Friday. So on the upside, I'm not going to have a Band-Aid on my head when I do Dave's wedding, which is kind of a good look, and I feel kind of good about that. So there's that.
5 seconds.
5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's close the polls. And we have, oh, look at you. You guys have been paying attention, and I love you. 92% of you say no, surrender is not a losing proposition. I would kiss you if I could, because you are absolutely correct. Because my favorite book of all time, which is the Oxford English Dictionary, defines surrender in the very first example as joining the winning side. I surrender to win. That's what I do. And in single-handed combat against this disease, I'm destined to lose. So I rely on all the resources I have. I join that winning side, and in that way, I can combat addiction like nobody's business, which, by the way, is one of the mottos of Recovery Boot Camp. Combat addiction, because that's what it is. Don't ever forget it. Even when you're sober, you have to fight this. And then in phase 3, we start to look at the ideas of forgiveness. Because without this, the love that we still possess can never manifest in a healthy way, right? And there's interesting things of forgiveness, because forgiveness is usually anonymous. It tends to be permanent. I mean, if I go up to some guy and go, "Oh, I forgive you," he's going to be like, "For what?" Like, whatever, right? So, we have to do this, and we have to even say it out loud or journal it or write it, because we have to forgive the IP, the identified patient. And in order to do that, we create boundaries. We do not let them run roughshod over our emotional lability, which means that I instill those boundaries, which are delineated and clear and firm. And that way, everything on their side, I'm okay with. And everything that they try to come over on my side, I don't allow. This allows me to transmit the love without feeling that it is, in fact, conditional, that it's a contractual agreement, that if you just do this, I'll buy, or you just don't get high, I'll pay for your stuff. We don't do contracts anymore. We do contracts with ourselves. We do contracts with our higher power. We do contracts with our sponsor. We never do contracts with the disease. Never, never, never. We do contracts against the disease. We have to also then forgive ourselves. We have to deconstruct the shame. All of us that thought that we in part played a major role in the disease that our children have to realize that we could have done nothing about it. 3 C's, I didn't cause it. I can't control it. I can't cure it. I now have the obligation to work to get better, thereby increasing the chances of my loved one to get better. But I don't own the reality, because a disease is a disease. Nobody owns cancer. Nobody owns diabetes. Nobody owns whatever, right? You don't, because I am a good parent. I have to deconstruct that shame. Hindsight bias is just the worst way to deal with anything. If I only knew then what I know now. Well, you didn't. You know now what you know now. So now if you don't do something different, now it's your fault. Before that, not so much. I am not to blame. Not at all. And remember, I'm going to say it again because it's that important. 3 C's of Al-Anon. I didn't cause it. I can't control it. I can't cure it. Not at all. So let's get into the next slide, the tail end of phase 3. So at the end, we're starting to heal in the families. Our loved one is healing. He may be in treatment 6 months, 8 months, 9 months. And what are we doing as a family unit for our own mental health? Well, we start to develop purpose and meaning. What happens is, out of the fires and the embers of the tragedy of this disease, like a phoenix, we can come back. And it's odd. You see so many people vocal about this disease. And unfortunately, we've talked about this before. The reason is because they're touched by it, right? Because of the stigma that exists in this country and the world about this disease. And when we start to find purpose and meaning, we start to actually get into true spiritual development for ourselves, that we become centered and connected to an ideologue where we can bring that to bear, right? We engage in development of our own communities through Al-Anon, through family members, through addicts' moms, through all these groups that we can bring ourselves into. We then contribute to the unity of the group. The group gets stronger and then reflects strength back into us, and we heal, bringing family healing in the long run. Alateen is hugely important. We really haven't mentioned it up until this point, but many addicts, now we see the highest probability or highest population of addicts between the ages of 18 and 25. And many of them have younger siblings. And understand that even if they're not fully aware of the crisis or the way that they're affected, they are indeed affected. Mere proximity creates post-acute withdrawal, post-traumatic stress. And what they also need to be treated, and they need to find themselves, because even people that, listen, how many times have I heard it? We see it in dysfunctional families all the time, where people are like, I'll never be my father. I'll never drink. I'll never be mean. And sure enough, they become the same thing. Because without the proper direction, the education, and the way to heal, it's almost inevitable that we reaffirm the same negative maladaptive behaviors. And we see that in siblings as well. So Alateen is hugely important. And finally, towards the end of the third phase, we start to recognize some of the gifts. What are the payoffs of my journey? What are the things that really matter to me? Well, the first one is I learn by having boundaries how to differentiate between judgment and judgmentalism, right? Uh, I start to have freedom instead of relief, right? So what's happening? All I sought when my loved one was active was just relief. I just want 5 minutes, just 5 minutes of relief, just 5 minutes of not having to look at the phone. Now I have freedom from those anxieties because of the work I do. I engage in the steps. I have spiritual alignments. I have a change. I have a community of support. And now I have freedom. Those things, I'm still prudent about them because they're realities, but I'm not dread filled and full of worry about them because I'm no longer getting momentary relief from that existential pain. I have freedom from it in my own way. And I start to engage in judgment through boundaries instead of judgmentalism, preconceived notions and believing in delusions that make me make decisions that are harmful to myself and my family member. I start to live in the moment. Instead of dreading the future and ruminating on the past, I become actively engaged in what I can do. And most importantly, I start to have hope instead of dread. So how does this wrap up in phase 3 for the family? Very simply like this. What do? We engage in Al-Anon, right? That's what we bring. And not just Al-Anon. I'm using Al-Anon because it's the most prevalent one, but there are tons of 12-step based self-help family organizations. And so let's talk about this in brief for a second, and let's open it with another poll question. And here's the poll question. Is Al-Anon about the identified patient, the addict? Is that what Al-Anon's about? Yeah, it's huge.
15.
Did you? Did you like it? Yeah. Did it help? Or did it cause you to rebel even more?
A little bit.
A little bit.
But I learned about the disease, so it's
Yeah.
really good to learn about it at that age because my parents couldn't explain it to me.
Right. And especially for teens, they're operating under so much misinformation. Like, they're roaming on Reddit and what's that, Arrowhead, and they're listening to their friends, and they're not armed. Listen, people need to have information when they make a decision. Right?
5 more seconds.
5 seconds and counting. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And the results are in, and they are no. Awesome. You guys are freaking awesome. Can you see me smiling? I love you. It is not about that person at all, because it is absolutely not about complaining and whining and rehashing your attempted powerlessness or feelings of control that have failed. It is not about complaining. It is not about them. It is about you. It is about the 12 steps that allow you a path to personal and spiritual health. It is about you getting a sponsor. It is about you being a sponsor. And that's what it's all about. That's pretty much what it's all about. Thank you for that answer. I cannot tell you how good it makes me feel to know that not even one person answered incorrectly. I feel really good about that, I got to tell you. All right, so let's move on. I think we're going into the next section. We are, in fact. So we're going to start on slide 133. We're going to talk about boundaries, okay? And what we're looking at is, let's open it up again, poll question it. So here's the poll question. Are there set parameters for boundaries, or do they fluctuate because they're circumstantial? It is, yeah. You made me hungry when you said meat and potatoes. Yeah. All right.
seconds.
All righty, countdown. 5 seconds to close. 4, 3, 2, and we're closing.
3 more seconds.
All right, 3,
There they go.
and I don't know, you'll figure it out. There we go. Boundaries. What's our numbers look like? Yes. 76% of you, again, 3/4 say yes, there are in fact set parameters for boundaries. You are absolutely correct. However, the rest of you are correct too. You utilize those set parameters, which are guides and completely concretized, in order to apply them in a malleable way, depending on the circumstance and situation. Awesome. Very good. You got to drop the poll or I can't click. All righty. So, like I said, yes, you're right. There are absolutely concretized set parameters. And then those kind of fixed realities allow you to engage in this kind of malleable approach to circumstances and situations. So let's talk about boundaries. Establishing boundaries makes you safer, makes you a safe person. Why? You figure that if you establish boundaries, it would be adversarial, and it may actually cause you to be threatened more emotionally or maybe even physically. But in fact, it does not. It absolutely, absolutely makes you safer because those boundaries are shared openly, which means that people now know where you stand and they can stand with you. Boundaries are the way we take care of ourselves, right? And we have the right to protect ourselves. Absolutely, unequivocally. I will not allow this disease to torture me anymore. And when we start to use that type of speech, when we use the word this disease instead of my son or my daughter, what we do is we bring it to the state of consciousness. This guy that I mentioned that I used to sponsor that passed away, I loved this man. And I wasn't mad at him, even when he started using again, even when he lied to me, even when he couldn't be honest with himself. I loved him. But I got to tell you, I hated his disease, and I still do. And when I set up this boundary for myself, where I don't look at the suffering addict as the bad person, I look at the disease they have as the true culprit, that changes the way I am. It changes the approach, right? I don't have conflicts of love because they're in essence compartmentalized, disease and the person that has it, right? And when we say this, we can actually give love to our family members and still despise their disease. Here's the other thing about boundaries. People who set boundaries, you would think they're restrictive, but they're not. In fact, they are absolutely generous. And why is that? Well, if you don't set boundaries, you're giving too much of yourself away. You're emptying your own vessel. With boundaries, you give what you want to give in the moment, which means that you can afford to be generous with others as well, right? Over a longer period of time. In essence, you've been giving so much to the disease manifested by the identified patient that you've been, in essence, stealing from your other family members the chance to have your love, giving them what they need. When you set boundaries, you regulate that in a conscientious manner. It's hugely important. What else do we know about boundaries? They actually allow other people to grow. See, we have this negative opinion. We think that they're restrictive, but in fact, they're not. Because when I set a boundary with you, what I'm willing to do and what I'm willing not to do, what I'm willing to have done, what I'm not willing to have done, it makes people that I have boundaries with conscious of their behavior that I'm unwilling to put up with. And that gives them the option to change. If I co-sign their bullshit so continuously, then they're always going to be doing the same thing because it's efficacious for them. But it's detrimental to me. Boundaries allow you to get more of what you want and less of what you don't want. Boundaries not only protect you from unwanted behavior, but they foster the behavior in others that you want. You cannot control them, but you can set up your thing where if they want what you have, they're going to comply, right? And I know, remember I said that love is not supposed to be transactional, and in this case it seems that it is, but we're not talking about love being transactional. We're talking about behavior being transactional, and contracts are always about behavioral. That's why they're called transactional contracts. That's why behavioral contracts in the recovery field are called transactional analysis contracts, because they're about what you do, not about how I feel, not about what you or I think. They're about what you do. I flow the love. I restrict the negative behavior. People that are inherently effective always set boundaries, both on themselves, on the people around them, because doing so keeps you in control of your time. Remember, you can't control anything outside, but you don't have to be powerless over those things because you can control your reaction to them. This is the basic premise of powerlessness. Every addict at Recovery Boot Camp, I spend hours with them in discussion about they confuse power and control. The step says we admitted we were powerless. I felt powerless because I attempted to control things outside of me, which I could never do, instead of realizing that when I received power from an outside source to change my reactions, those things no longer affected me. I didn't control them. I controlled the way I reacted to them. So when I'm in control of my time and my efforts, it makes me feel better. So doing so keeps you in control of your efforts, and it makes you feel better about yourself. It lends you to being more effective. In essence, it's the thing that makes you more effective. Here's a very important thing. All right? It's about sticking to your guns. Right? In order for boundary setting to work for you, you have to have a strong developed commitment to uphold that. And in your mind, it has to be right and true. It now becomes a moral standard that you project into an ethical manner. Morals are my internal conscious standard. Ethics are how I, in essence, litigate that in my family, how I activate those standards, because those are behavioral. So you have to act consistently over time in doing these things. So if we talk about doing it over time, redoing this thing, practicing all the time, let's ask a simple poll question that every single one of you have heard a million times in your life. Does practice make perfect? Simple question. When do you want to do Q&A? Are you getting questions?
We'll go to where you wanted to go. We'll read the questions. You can prompt them.
Cool.
Okay. We'll go into 38.
Yep.
38.
That's what I was thinking.
Okay. 5 seconds.
5 seconds to close, ladies and gentlemen.
Interesting answers.
Huh?
Interesting answers.
Are they?
There it is. Polls are closing.
Polls are closing. And we have, yes, practice makes perfect, 67%, and no, 33%. Well, the no's have it, because I have never met anyone perfect, no matter how hard they practice. Let me give you an example. Those of you that are baseball fans understand that for someone to get in the Hall of Fame, they have to hit about 300. That's the top of the field. That means that those guys get it right 1 out of 3 times. Trust me, if you had a job making pizzas and you burned 2 out of 3 pizzas, you probably wouldn't have a job, no matter how hard you practiced. But these pros practice all the time, and the closest they can achieve perfection is on their best days about 33 1/3%, because practice does not make perfect. It, in fact, makes progress. Practice makes progress. Practice makes progress. It is not an end game. It is a continuum. And the more I practice, the progressive nature of my disease gets minimized and the progressive nature of my spiritual enlightenment gets maximized. All right? If this is not familiar behavior to you, it will in fact feel awkward and unnatural. Practice, 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 right? But anything worth doing is worth doing badly at first. Absolutely. Dalai Lama says that when you fail 20 times, you haven't. You've just learned 20 ways not to succeed, right?
Right, can I interject?
Sure.
You added some stuff for the boundaries onto the PowerPoint. Correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it doesn't match the workbook anymore.
No.
So just let them know.
Okay, so
We'll upload the new one tomorrow.
okay, so you know, Tim reminded me of this. I added, since we were talking about this, I figured I needed to bring something extra into the equation. And what we're going to be doing after this introductory part of, oh, this is actually it, I think.
At 133 to change.
133. So these are not going to be in your workbook. I added these in just in the last couple weeks. And I did it because I wanted to be super specific to help you understand the nature of boundaries, understand what they mean, and understand how to effectively install them in your life, as well as there's an entire section that we added, which is a step-by-step guide for writing them, in essence, how you can write your own boundaries. And it's important to write them, because even when I have my guys do 9 steps, I have them do a script, in essence, right? Usually I have them write a letter and hand the letter to the person so that they can't manipulate the conversation, so they don't get thrown off track because of the emotional interaction or entanglements that can happen, because this is a labeled time, right? There's tension. So it's the same with boundaries, right? Same thing as when you're setting a fence as when you're taking it down with another human being. So we started in 133. These are not in the book. They will be uploaded for download.
Let's make it this weekend, so I have a little bit of time.
This weekend. So by Monday, you will be able to download the next section and review them. And remember, you can always pull this up and rewatch it with them. It's an hour, you can get to halfway, whatever it is. I think we're 40 minutes into it by the time we got into these right here. Okay, so we know that it does not make perfect. It makes progress, and it's worth doing. And initially, we don't like it. It's unnatural, right? And the people that the addicts, they respond to it also. They tend to shy away because it's unnatural for them, because they're used to getting their own way. They're used to being able to triangulate and manipulate. So which means that you need to keep those up. Practice, 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 and you will progress and progress and progress in your ability to do this. Also, you develop a neurological pathology to this. It becomes habituated for you, where you don't even have to think about it and struggle with it. So the easier it gets to keep this boundary up, the more effective it actually is. Practice, you will get more skillful and more graceful in these particular boundary settings. Here's another very, very important thing when setting boundaries. You have to name the behavior to which you're setting a boundary. Naming the behavior can be as simple as saying, you're in my personal space, or you keep asking me to go home with you even though I already told you no, or you know what, I answered you already. I answered you already. Please stop asking me the same question. We have to name the behavior that is objectionable, that causes us stress and brings us to an emotional place. And that's where the boundary lies. When we name the behavior, we can actually attach a boundary to it. Because maybe the person who's doing this didn't actually realize what they were doing. They didn't know they were encroaching. And when I name that behavior and set that boundary as the precursor to setting the boundary, it makes them aware of the foible, possibly. Fingers crossed, I wish it would be that easy. But again, practice makes progress. And it is, in fact, a relatively non-confrontational approach, right? Because it gives that person an out, right? You say, listen, you're too much in my, oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Even though, they may have had an ulterior motive. Say they're trying to get a date and they're getting very close, they're getting super close, right? So they get in, and you're like, listen, you're making me uncomfortable just by being in my space, right? So they say, oh, I'm sorry. And it actually gives them an out, because instead of you rejecting them, dude, stop trying to hit on me, you're creepy. You give them this thing, it gives them an out. So it actually allows them to have a way out without losing face. And a lot of times that's really what angers the addict more than anything, is the perceived loss of face, right? Because he knew it was a gamble going into it to get the manipulation. And if he doesn't get the manipulation, it's just not getting the manipulation. But losing face is the thing that angers them and tries to make them work even harder for it. So naming it can also help you gain more clarity about a situation that feels off to you, right? Even if you can't really pinpoint exactly what the behavior is, you can use this tool, this kind of naming, to validate your own intuition and instincts, which are important because as we recover, right? Last week we had a question about use your gut feeling. And we said, yeah, the answer is yes and no, right? At first you don't want to use your gut because you tend to be emotionally driven, and that's a reactive reality. But as you start to develop your techniques, your boundaries, your own recovery, your own spiritual center, what you're in essence doing is redeveloping that small, still voice within you, right? The whole point is to regenerate those instincts, right? And this will actually help you validate them, understanding those things, however vague they may or may not be, by naming them, even if it's just in your own head. Hugely important. And let's go to the next slide and we'll close with this and go to Q&A. And the next slide is again about, wait, did we do 37 yet? No, we didn't. Okay, we got 2 slides. So here's another thing about boundaries. You give a directive. It's clear, it's concise. In fact, you tell the person exactly what you want them to do as concisely and clearly as humanly possible. I need you to not call me at 2 in the morning when you're high. Please take your hand off my knee. Back off. I need this conversation to stop now. We can discuss it tomorrow. Tempers are high. Please, we'll talk about it tomorrow. Be very, very, very concise in this directive. All right? Sometimes people respond well to direct orders. Sometimes they don't. Listen, if alcoholics are inherently, defensive and defiance is their number one thing, when they feel like they're getting a finger shaken at them, they're going to react. So you reinforce the boundary, right? You reinforce. And what does that do? In fact, it demonstrates that you are clear about what you want. I said we're not having this conversation now. Go to bed. We'll talk about it in the morning. That is my boundary. All right, so let's get into it. One of the last slides that we're going to do, and then we're going to move on, is this idea, repeat it. Remember, we said practice makes progress. Well, a reaffirmation, repeat it, repeat it, repeat it. So here's the question, because we talked about these things as maybe being possibly aggressive or assertive in terms of our interaction with the addict. So here's the simple question. Do you believe that repetition of your boundary will just make the addict tune out, right? So remember, practice, 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 be forceful, but the poll question is this: does repetition make the addict just tune out?
I'm going to do that.
I am. Seems like the right thing to do.
And after this slide, we'll get to as many questions as we can, and then just let everybody know that you'll be answering
Yep.
throughout the week.
Yep.
And then at the very end, we can let them know where to find the webinars.
Yep.
The videos, because I just posted the page for the recorded version.
Okay. And that's on the families drop down, right?
Mm-hmm. And it's on there. It's already on their chat.
Oh, perfect.
I'm going to go ahead and close the poll.
Okay. We're closing the poll.
3, 2, 1.
Ooh, yes and no. Not too split, 62 to 38. The no's are actually leaning towards the correct answer. Yeah, yes, it can in fact make them resistant, but they're not going to hear what they don't want to hear. And in fact, it really doesn't tune them out. What it actually does is the contrary approach. What it does is it makes them realize that you're serious. When you stay focused on the directive that you are giving and do not let yourself be diverted until it's respected. You want to call it a broken record? You want to call it skip CD? Doesn't matter, right? Why? Because this skill is about demonstrating persistence. You can hit me. I have always caved to your assault, to your war of attrition on me. I will no longer do that. I will no longer cave to your war of attrition. Never, never again is that going to happen. Because what it does is it demonstrates your seriousness, your clarity, and your intention. I am serious about this. I am making it simple for you to understand. And I am not going to let this occur. And it prevents you from being diverted by a clever manipulator. Because we are that. That is our entire job, is to trick you into doing things. Listen, as a professional, my job is to trick every single client and every family member I come in contact with to do something that's hard and they generally organically don't want to do. First, I trick them into doing it, and then I make them think that it was their idea in the first place. That is my entire job, just so you know. So next week, we're going to end. I think we have one or two more slides basically about I think we have to do one more slide because then that's the end of that section. So let's do 39 because there's no question on it. So, and here's the final thing about boundaries. End it, right? You set it, you end it. Don't harp on it. Sometimes all this good boundary setting, right, doesn't yield results. If it doesn't, let it go. Don't kill your energies trying to reassess a boundary that is not going to be effective, right? It doesn't yield the desired results. You are not in control of how other people are going to respond to you. After all, and sometimes people are just not willing to respect other people. We've seen that in our relationships. This may mean that you get up and leave the room, or that you seek out someone in the environment to assist you in ending the interaction, right? And that you end the relationship in which your boundaries are repeatedly violated, which means this, and this is hard to hear, but disassociation and non-engagement is an active form of self-healing. And if you give them the options and they continually violate them, you need to put them on the pay no mind list. All right, we're going to end there. Next week, we're going to start in this next section, which is how do we assert these? Actual techniques of how to assert these boundaries and how to manifest them. So Tim told me to remind you guys that all the past ones are up, right? The past ones are all up, and you can find them at the Recovery Bootcamp website on the drop-down tab that says Families. And
there is a link in the chat box.
There is a link in the chat box that Tim put up for you guys. And listen, we're going to do asserting, we're going to do writing, and then we're going to close with the assessments again. And I think there's 4 slides in conclusion. So it looks to me that we have 2 more weeks. So we're going to get into a lot of information next week, and then we're going to close off and talk about how we're going to recycle and what's coming up next, right, afterwards, and all those kind of things. And we've got some stuff in the works, wink, wink, that I think you're going to like. All right, so let's go ahead and start with the questions. Do you want to make it big, the thing?
Yeah, let me do that.
Okay. This is Tim.
Go ahead, guys. Take these off. All right, that should be it.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So, actually, I'd like to start off. There's a statement, but I think it would be a good discussion.
Statements are always lead to good questions. I'm kind of all about that.
Sometimes we don't know our boundaries until they get crossed.
Ah, that is true.
And so we have an emotional reaction to them.
Okay.
So it's actually good because I think a lot of people don't know.
Okay, so perfect. So the statement was, sometimes we don't know our boundaries until they get crossed. and we have an emotional reaction to them. And remember that when I read that piece from the Al-Anon book on page 30, where it said, Al-Anon allows us to become aware of the decisions we're already making. And in doing so, it allows us to make new ones. The same rule applies for what are called like intuitive boundaries. And it actually, having our feelings hurt, in essence, is a way to make us aware of where our boundary was and how it's being transgressed, how it's being stepped over. And this emotional reaction, instead of taking it as a personal assault, I'm going to take it as knowing where to draw my line, right? And so it's absolutely true that sometimes having our feelings hurt, feeling some sort of way about some sort of interaction, about something that actually happens, is going to cause me to realize, you know what? That was a boundary that I didn't even know I had, and now I know I have it because I feel violated behind it. So now's my time to assert that boundary, which is helpful because remember, we can have those things in our brain, but without asserting them in a public forum, or without asserting them directly to the identified patient and setting them in stone, then the probability that they're going to be reviolated over and over again is very, very high. It's a very good statement. Thank you very much.
All right, we have another one. I'm going to paraphrase this one. The mom allowed her daughter to come back to the house because she was talking about going to a long-term program, but she was going through withdrawal and started using it again. Well, then, even though she was denying it, she has an appointment with a Suboxone doctor in a couple of days. Should they ignore the drug use for now until she gets on the Suboxone program?
Okay, I'm going to have to be hardcore with you. Why is she in your house? Absolutely. Are you willing to wake up in the morning and find her dead? That is the question you have to ask. And allowing her to stay in your house and use until she can get on her, now, is she going on a Suboxone maintenance program or a detox protocol? Those things are also a whole nother discussion that we could spend an hour on. But I have to tell you, she chose, instead of going to rehab, instead of maintaining her recovery. Remember, it's not her fault she's an addict, but once she's aware, it becomes the onus falls on her to do the right thing. It's her obligation to get better. And I have seen so many people in the desire to not have their children on the street, allow them to come in their house when they're using, under this promise that in 2-3 days they're going to go see the sub doctor, and they have found them dead. Understand this. If it's new on the beginning end of a relapse, the probability for really bad overdose is extremely high because they've had some abstinence time. She can't be in your house. She can't. It's gonna be tragic, and you don't want to have that for the rest of your life, and that's what will happen. I can't be any softer about that. It's untenable situation.
I like this one actually. It says, does the age of the addict require a particular approach?
Yes, in fact, it absolutely does. Does the age of the addict require a particular approach? It absolutely does. When I talk to youngsters, I cuss a lot more than I do when I talk to older people. But that's just one approach. The approach is this. You have to understand that in the younger sect, you have to understand approaching them in a different way. You have to motivate them with different things. You have to inspire them in a different way. You have to bring in an identification protocol that's slightly different. You have to expose them to other young people that got sober early and have attained things, right? All the things that they thought were dorky and cool, now they see are cool. And in certain populations, whether they're male or LGBT or mixed, there's twists, right? Basically, the core program is identical in terms of the steps and inculcation of this particular type of approach. However, everything allows for a little bit of tweak and a little bit of approach. And what you do is you want to build unity amongst the recovering individuals in whatever sector and group they're in, because in doing so, you actually allow them to generate their own type of program within the confines of the structure of the program that allows them to develop. And that's why we have certain focusing. For instance, here we have men, young men specifically, that are super responsive because the environment, the alumni, It's a complete saturation of people that are in their area, in their group, in their mindset, in their conscientious range, that are inspiring them because they've gone through it. And that's really what it is. It's about point of identification. So the most important thing in approaching different populations is finding the key points of identification within that population and then utilizing them by bringing exemplars from that population that are successful into the mix every single time. And we do that here at Recovery Boot Camp. We have the alumni. There's guys with 8 years, 10 years come speak all the time, and they're always active in the program. They always sponsor guys. They always mentor them. And it's because they're in the same pathology, same lifestyle, same timeline, same area geographically. That's what we do. We bring the successes in, encourage the ones to be successes themselves. And so it's the same kind of approach. It's just different for like subcategories.
Cool. We're going to do one more. And it says, why couldn't the addiction be my fault if they didn't feel loved and accepted?
Well, remember, first of all, it's not your fault. And if they didn't feel loved and accepted, it's because they didn't feel loved and accepted. Remember in the very beginning when we talked about trauma, I think it was week 2 or 3. Trauma, and I get a lot of shit for this, trauma is real and it's not. It exists in our head. Even though the event may be concretized and be actual, my ability to hold that, become a perpetual victim of it, uses it as an excuse for bad behavior, is my part in that reality, right? Everybody gets victimized. The world is sharp. Do I become a victim or not? And when you say that they didn't feel love, they didn't feel respect, it's because the perceived trauma for the addict is equally as valuable, is equally as real trauma, as real event-based trauma. Event-based trauma and perceived trauma in the mind of the addict are the same. Because what you have to understand, the limbic part of our brain, which is the monkey response part, has that, ooh, it feels good, right? Our prefrontal cortex, which is the contemplative part, allows us to have the stress and understand that the reward is coming because I have this or that or this or that. And where the disease exists is in the mesolimbic system, which connects those two things, stress and reward. So if I increase a stress or perceive a stress in my neurology, it's a real stress, right? And again, not your fault. You did the best you could in the time you could. And system dynamics are, family dynamics are hugely complex, and everyone can always do better. But it is not your fault. It is not your fault. Every single thing of every moment of every day of everybody's life has culpability in where they're at. Everything. You can't pinpoint one thing. It's impossible. Don't own what's not yours. And understand that the addict in that cycle of victimization will not feel it even when given. It's the way it is. All right? We're going to wrap it up. All right, so thank you guys so much for being here. Like I said, I think we have 2 weeks left. It's awesome. I'm super excited to close. I'm super excited to help you with writing these boundaries. I'm so excited. And you guys are amazing for all of you 100% answering the correct question correctly about Al-Anon. I cannot tell you how, God, I'm so stoked about that. So let's just say thanks again. Oh, first of all, I have to say this. Dave's mom, Mazel Tov. Congratulations. Katrina's mom, if you're watching, Mazel Tov as well. There's a wedding this weekend. We're very excited, and we love all of you. And thanks again for being with us and sticking with us. I know this is an arduous process, and we need to, again, just vocalize. Coach, thank you so much. Beverly, thank you. The coach is Coach Schnellenberger of the Schnellenberger Family Foundation. Beverly is his wife, also Tim's mom and dad. Well, not Beverly, mom and dad, you know what I mean. And they're the ones responsible for the Schnellenberger Family Foundation, the foundation that allows us to help you. That's what we want to do. Families understanding the disease and coming to terms with it. And we here at Recovery Boot Camp think that that is the very, very, not the single most, but it's up there. It is a super important part of this entire process. Family disease needs family treatment. Systemic realities need systemic approaches. And that's what we do. So again, thank you all for coming, and reach out to Nick.
And you'll be getting back to the people.
Oh yeah, and as always, I will email you. I know I slacked a couple. I missed a few. I'm sorry. I'll catch up at the beginning of the week. I think I missed 2 or 3. I talked to a couple people on the phone. There's someone I tried to reach out to. My typing's not so great, as evidenced by my stupid typos in a simple thing. But also understand that if I send you an email and you want to talk to me, feel free to call me. My number's at the bottom of the email, and we can have a discussion. I'm much better, as you can plainly see, speaking than typing. I don't have that. And remember to review the things, download all the study guides, everything from that section. That what's it called again? The handout section. And
they're on the basic training webpage.
oh yes, and
Handouts are on the basic.
okay, if you go to recoverybootcamp.com and you drop down on the families, there's a basic training family edition webpage. You go to that webpage. It has all the things are accessible, the handouts, the previous webinars. We're going to wrap it up in a couple weeks. We're going to start the cycle again. There's going to be a few changes and try and compress it a little bit, try to get it in a 10-week model, but there is a lot of information. I love you all. Thank you so much for being with us, and stay healthy, and you deserve to be happy. Thanks.